From the air of mystery associated with a papal conclave that intrigued the world to the media still buzzing about the first U.S.-born pope, the scent of chrism oil seems to be everywhere in 2025. In this Catholic Life segment, we look at how our faith is so on trend this year. Adult baptisms are booming this year. U.S. Catholic dioceses are reporting a surge in converts across the country, a 50% year-over-year increase in Cleveland, Ohio, a 67% bump in Winona, Rochester, Minnesota. These Catholic conversions are universal. In France, the French Bishops' Conference reported a 45% uptick in adult converts at Easter 2025. And just this month, a record 19,000 people, mostly young, traveled on the 43rd annual Chartres pilgrimage, a 3-day journey from Paris to Chartres, France. Kazakhstan's Bishop Athanasius Schneider was there.
It was the most high participation in all history of 40 years.
With the death of Pope Francis in late April, our culture went from being obsessed with the Oscar-winning movie Conclave to then watching the real thing unfold in Rome, or at least what we could watch. Global searches for how to become Catholic surged by a staggering 373% between April 20th and April 26th. And then this moment.
Habemus Papam.
Since taking the chair of St. Peter, Pope Leo XIV has been enjoying a warm embrace from the media.
Catholicism's having a moment.
SiriusXM, the Catholic channel host Katie McGrady, says Leo fever has hit the U.S. in particular.
But the American of it all is that he's one of us. He might do for America what JP2 did for Poland, which was this revival of excitement and joy and pride in our Catholicism.
Whether you're looking at the sign of the times or even a recent cover of Time magazine, the countercultural Catholic Church is being embraced by our culture for now. To delve into this perceived revival of Catholicism, we're joined by two Catholic journalists who've been tracking these trends as well. Christine Emba is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Her work's focus includes looking at youth culture and social norms. She's also a contributing writer at the New York Times. Madeleine Kearns is an associate editor at the Free Press and recently dove into this topic with her article, How Catholicism Got Cool. Well, let's start there. Let's start with this question for you both. Is Catholicism cool right now? What are you observing? Maddie, I'll go to you first.
So if by cool we mean something that young people are very interested in, then absolutely. And this is borne out by the data that you just mentioned in your introduction, but also anecdotally priests are saying that not only are they seeing an uptick in baptisms, but actually they're seeing an uptick in youth participation and youth baptisms in particular. I think this has been noted as a general trend in men, young men becoming more interested in Christianity. But what's interesting is the kind of conventional wisdom around this is that young people become less religious, even those who are raised in the faith, they become less religious. And then maybe later in life, when they marry and they settle down, they come back to church. Whereas what we're seeing here is actually young people who maybe don't come from any religious background, or certainly not a very committed one, seeking out Catholicism and becoming very committed themselves, and sometimes becoming more Catholic and practicing their faith than even their parents. And that can be a kind of odd reversal of the presumed social norm.
Christine, what's your reaction to the question on whether Catholicism is cool right now?
You know, there is the question of just whether it's gaining in, cultural relevance among young people. And that is certainly true. I mean, as the data that you guys just showed will tell us. But I actually do think that Catholicism is becoming kind of cool, period, in that it is a cultural trend that's being embraced by kind of cultural forerunners. You're seeing, first of all, just in this moment, a fascination with aesthetics, the look of things, and also a tiredness with the digital realm, with being on social media, with sort of seeing things online among young people. And one thing that is very true about Catholicism is that it is incredibly embodied.
Mm,
So, the ritual, the Eucharist, the
mhm.
going to church, the icons, they're all sort of right there and visible, which is attractive. And then, of course, the aesthetic. I mean, one of my favorite tweets during the conclave was that, if you're looking at two cardinals in full regalia, like hanging out together in front of a basilica, like that just looks cooler than any service that you're going to see anywhere else. And so that's kind of attractive to young people who are so interested in visual things
Mhm.
right now.
Mhm. I spoke with Catholic radio host and author Katie McGrady about what she's observing when it comes to young people in particular being drawn to the faith. Here's part of what she told me.
In this incredibly relativistic society where do anything you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else has been tried and found wanting by young people. The church has something deeper and better than the constant scroll or wishy-washy morals. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. The church should be capitalizing on that at this moment.
Maddie, let's stick to this theme here. What do we know about young people in particular flocking to the church right now, and why?
Well, certainly, I think there is an emphasis on traditionalism, and I don't necessarily mean the traditional Latin Mass, which is what people assume you mean when you say that, but rather orthodox teachings, morals, the challenge of Catholicism, the challenge of being very different from what secular culture offers. And certainly, one thing that struck me was that the young people I was speaking to for this article were telling me things such as, I went and tried other forms of Christianity, but it was too wishy-washy, or one young man said, oh, it felt like I was at a concert, whereas when I'm in the Catholic Church, I feel like I'm there for God, I'm there to worship. One mentioned the role of silence in the Catholic liturgy, or another actually mentioned the role of Gregorian chant and sort of feeling transported. So certainly there's a real hunger for the transcendent.
Christine, is there a gender gap when it comes to these Catholicism trends that we're seeing? What role are men playing in particular right now?
So, as a general rule, well, not as a general rule, actually, in the last Pew Religious Values Survey, we saw a kind of surprising leveling off of the number of people, including young people, who are leaving Christianity. But when we look at who is returning to the church or even converting to Catholicism or other forms of Christianity right now, we are seeing a surge in young men. And young men are also tending to join sort of more conservative or orthodox, either religions or congregations, including sort of more traditionalist, which again is not necessarily to say traditional Latin Mass, but sort of traditional or traditionalist parishes. And, we don't know exactly why, but there are a couple theories that I would put forth. One is that I think, as we've been talking about, there is a sense of a loss of norms in a moment in which everything seems up for grabs, including sort of what you worship, what your gender is, what your sexuality is. And this is true, I think, for men in particular who seem to be struggling in this moment with definitions of what is masculinity? What does it mean to be a man? The Catholic Church has really defined and clear and historical roles when it comes to gender and sex. And I think a lot of young men are drawn to a space where they feel that there is space made for them to be a man, that there is a specific role, that of the priest, the father, that men play in the Catholic faith. But we also just seeing young men returning to faith broadly more often than women are. And again, there's also some pushback from women who feel particularly ostracized or marginalized when they think about church teaching on sex, recent rulings on abortion. And so men don't seem as bothered by some of those things, and I think are thus more willing to return.
It's been just over a month now since Pope Leo's election, so it is too early to see actual data on whether this Leo fever is resulting in more converts. But is Pope Leo making Catholicism more mainstream right now? Christine, your thoughts?
Well, we just saw, that picture of him in the socks hat that went viral just a few days ago. But I think that Americans, especially, are excited by the idea of an American pope. And frankly, because Pope Leo is new and we're still sort of learning his position on a number of things, he is proving, at least at this moment, to be a somewhat less polarizing figure than Pope Francis turned out to be among, especially more, again, traditional Catholics in the US. So for now, at least, it does seem that Pope Leo is drawing interest as people watch the conclave, as people are sort of tying him to his native Chicago, and not causing division.
Maddie, what are your thoughts on how Pope Leo factors into all of this?
Yeah, I would agree very strongly with everything Christine just said. I think also there was such with under Francis there was such confusion, and I don't blame that all on Francis. I mean, part of it is, of course, things get lost in translation, and to have a pope who speaks English, natively speaks English, is going to be a very interesting thing in itself. I mean, just for him to have given addresses in English, and of course he's fluent in multiple languages, I think that's going to bring some much needed clarity. He does also seem just temperamentally a bit more reserved than Francis, a bit more moderate, perhaps, at least in his temperament. And I think these are all strengths, again, given that the context that we're dealing with right now is a very polarized, divided church.
And Maddie, finally, there's still a lot of buzz about whether we are on the brink of a religious revival, particularly here in the U.S. Meanwhile, this very weekend, the U.S. Bishop's 3-year National Eucharistic Revival comes to its official end. Are there any parallels that you see there?
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, the broad story of religion in America is, of course, one of decline, and I don't think that's necessarily completely changed by these promising developments. But certainly within the cohort who are going to church, we are seeing this revival, this renewal of interest, and especially among the young, which is very positive. Gen Z are the latest the only generation in the last 4 or 5 to be not declining further in religiosity than the previous one, which is certainly a very promising trend. In terms of the Eucharistic revival, I certainly think there's a parallel in the sense that some of the converts I was speaking to were talking about, why Catholicism in particular, as opposed to other denominations, and they were citing the Eucharist and the sacramental life of the church as a reason, as something that made Catholicism distinct. So certainly we can see that trend there.
There is so much more I would love to discuss, but we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you both for your very thoughtful analysis.
Thank you so much for having me.